Do your board meetings have the impact that you'd like to see? Or do they sometimes get hijacked or drift out of focus? In this video, we explore essential agreements that trustees can agree on to ensure that meetings and interactions are professional, purposeful, and prescient. Establishing a set of essential agreements for trustees has actually two elements, both of which are powerful in reshaping and ensuring board deliberations are impactful. In the first instance, the actual process of trustees identifying their own essential agreements provides a platform to tease out some of the problem areas and thus focus on positive reinforcement messages. Of course, this in itself can be a delicate process to manage and should be carefully prepared, perhaps using the head of school or an outside consultant perhaps to lead the discussion. To be effective, you need to be able to spot these elements in meetings that cause discussions to go off track, but to be able to do so without acrimony or making it personal. And there lies the skill. So for example, say that you have a very knowledgeable trustee, but tends to either go off at a tangent during meetings, or his or her comments need to be prefaced with a bit of a story to give opinion some context. Some people are very reflective, while others are effectively forming their opinions when thinking it through. While in some cases this can be perfectly valid, there can equally be times when the rest of the trustees are rolling their eyes back and lose the flow, they lose patience. What may seem as perfectly logical to one person in their own mind may not actually translate to how everyone else sees the problem or their thoughts. Now, of course, to tackle this and raise the legitimate concerns that maybe someone is dominating a meeting, but it's actually just waffle or trivia, that could be hurtful. And it's a very personal criticism. And so a successful session to identify essential agreements would steer away from the personal and keep attention on chosen behavior aspects instead. Quite often these personal quirks become much more identifiable once a session like this has taken place, and in a light-hearted way there can be some new norms agreed. Typically, the essential agreements cover some of the basics of good governance and serve as a frequent reminder to everyone, which would be including newcomers, of course. So, for example, the need to disclose any potential conflict of interest is often identified as an essential agreement. If the essential agreements are embedded into the practice of the board, then in addition to the annual signed declaration of conflict of interest, perhaps the chair asks all trustees at the start of a meeting to disclose any personal or potential conflicts of interest with anything that's on the agenda items. Confidentiality would also typically come out of a group session to identify agreements. To be clear about the importance of frank discussions in the meetings, but also to clarify about what and how information may be shared outside of the board. Basically, the essential agreements are a simple summary for how trustees are expected to behave and interact so that the board can have a real impact in its work. If everyone has agreed to have respectful yet honest dialogue, or to always refer to the school's mission before making any new proposals, then you're much more likely to have meetings that are engaging and welcome diverse input. Another way that some school boards go about this is to create a kind of job description or a code of conduct for trustees. Job description really isn't the correct term, since it might imply recompense as well, but you can understand the point more than a code of conduct, such that the document is a summary that clearly defines the roles and responsibilities, authority, and expected behaviours. There may be a statement that explains that the trustees are responsible for the strategic, long-term issues and the long-term success of the school, whereas the head of school and administration is responsible for the tactical decisions and the day-to-day running of the school. The nice thing about identifying a job description is that it can more naturally lead into the process of self-evaluation. So, for example, the description can show clearly the timescale for a post, whether elected or appointed, and the process for reviewing or leaving that post. It can serve as a reminder for all the essential agreements, such as respecting the speaker or being prepared for all meetings. But in laying out the skills, attitudes, and duties for trustees, this provides a natural segue for reviewing your own performance against these criteria, either ongoing or maybe through an end-of-year annual process. As with the essential agreements, the job description can illustrate more clearly the important arrangements that surround confidentiality. It's often a tricky issue for new trustees to wrap their head around, which is exacerbated by often close relationships that surround international schools and a misguided perception that a trustee needs to be advocating for a particular constituency among the parents rather than advocating for the long-term success of the school as a whole. The trick is to recognize that board decisions should be shared widely and communicated well among the relevant stakeholders, while keeping the details of the discussions and issues confidential. When trustees blur the boundaries of confidentiality, whether consciously as an effort to improve communication or naively, either way it tends to have the effect of undermining the board as a whole, and often the relationship with the head of school and staff suffer as a result. Trustees are privy to confidential information, including legal issues or strategies for dealing with such legal challenges, personnel issues, serious student discipline concerns, or parents, or perhaps the status of their fee payments. Having a clear statement relating to confidentiality on the job description helps keep the importance of this aspect of being a trustee at the forefront of people's minds, while opening the door for discussion within the board about strategies for dealing with parent questions. It's not uncommon for trustees to be approached at social functions or in casual meetings, and it's much easier if trustees have already anticipated how they deal with such conversations with parents and have a stock reply ready, such as, John, I know that the board issued a letter about that thing last week, but I'm not at liberty to discuss the details since it's a private matter for the parent or the teacher or whatever concerned. There may be times where the concerns raised by a parent may be actually legitimate, or perhaps you don't have the sufficient background insight to the issues to be really sure. Again, the job description type of summary is useful as a reminder to trustees on how to respond to issues that arise that don't undermine the organization and the people within it. So while you feel you may be doing the right thing by hearing a complaint or a concern from a parent, can you be sure of the intentions and messages that it may be sending? So, for example, perhaps the issue has already been raised formally with the teacher or the head, but the teacher or parent doesn't like the response, and so now they're trying to go round the issue a different way because you're providing a sympathetic ear. It's a very slippery slope where teachers or parents may try to find ways to go round established channels of communication or grievance procedures, and regardless of how innocent it may seem, they often result in undermining confidence and trust within the school. The school, of course, should have a grievance procedure that's well documented in teacher and parent handbooks, and this should be where you point people to who come to you with a complaint. And so a summary in the job description serves as a useful reminder and helps ensure that all trustees operate with a view to being productive, efficient, and impactful. The job description might document the scheduled meetings for the year and perhaps the annual calendar of key board events, deadlines, and targets. This would link to the expectation that you would attend each board meeting fully prepared. It can be frustrating and disheartening for fellow trustees and the head of school or any observers in the meeting to see someone frantically trying to read reports in the meeting itself and resulting in disjointed thinking when important decisions are required simply because they weren't prepared in advance of the session. Finally, the job description or code of conduct, just as with the essential agreements, can clarify expectations when it comes to communicating board decisions. You want to ensure that discussions in board meetings are robust and inclusive, so that everyone has had the opportunity to express themselves and their opinions fully. Yet it's important to be clear, crystal clear, that board decisions need to be publicly supported by all trustees, irrespective of whether or not they personally voted in agreement or not in the meeting. There's nothing more divisive than trustees trying to distance themselves from board decisions. Of course, if you feel so strongly about an issue that you can't publicly support it, then arguably the right course of action might be that you need to resign from the board entirely. So the chair would work towards getting a consensus in a meeting, the issues that may lead to a unanimous decision, of course, but it should be one that all trustees nevertheless can support, since they're obligated to support the majority decision. The chair would also determine with the board how issues or decisions will be communicated to stakeholders, and then trustees would be expected to speak with one voice thereafter. Do you already have a robust set of essential agreements or a job description in place for trustees? And have been refreshed recently as trustees have maybe had a turnover? What might you want to raise with the rest of your board so that your work on the board can be more impactful?